Quick rules of engagement. You can only know about what we've read about so far in the story. So up to Solomon and the breaking of the kingdoms.
Okay.
So we can't know anything in the future.
And the new person has to recap the entire story themselves.
Yeah, we did.
I quit.
Okay, I will recap. We've learned about God and his attributes through his creation. God is really creative, really powerful. He's created all things. He's created angels and humans and given them free will, set them boundaries, and they run all over those boundaries. And he set them consequences for those boundaries, and they get the consequences. Then we learn about the continued choices that are being made by humans as they just continue going downhill, all the way down through Cain and all the way through Noah's generation, where just every human has been, all their actions and all their thoughts are evil. And so God is trying to save this remnant through Noah and saying, all right, well, I've waited until I just have one left, and so I have to wipe out the rest of the evil to save this one remnant. And so he does. And then after the flood, Abraham is chosen by God to go and find a land, to find a promised land. He doesn't tell him where to go, he just tells him where to stop. And then he's choosing Abraham because Abraham is a generous person, a selfless person. And so these are the qualities that God is looking for. This is the kind of God that is looking for these kind of qualities. Again, Abraham isn't perfect, but God doesn't count his deeds towards righteousness. He counts his belief towards righteousness. And then we skip through Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, and the Israelites are stuck in Egypt for 400 years. They're oppressed, heavily oppressed as slaves, and all the building works that the Israelites or the Egyptians want them to do. And God shows up to Moses and calls out Moses, another imperfect human being, who is both in the Egyptian and Israelite cultures. He knows both of those, or has both of those backgrounds, sorry. And then he uses Moses to go and talk to Pharaoh and set his people free, to rescue his people from the oppression. And in doing so, he doesn't just snap and rescue his people, but he's actually trying to struggle against Pharaoh and try to capture Pharaoh's heart and really the heart of the Egyptians, to say, hey, I am the true God here, right? Not your gods, I am the true God. But eventually he has to do a lot of damage there to really wake them up and really break their control. He leads them out into the wilderness. The Israelites start complaining right away, but he provides for them, right, over and over. Water, food, both bread and meat, and just over and over he provides for them, whether they're complaining over and over. And then he brings them to the mountain, right, the mountain of God, Mount Sinai, and really shows them the power of God, and in cloud and fire and smoke, and lays down some boundaries, right, the morality ruler for them. And then they try to get into they go up to the border of Canaan, the promised land, and then they waver, right, they lose faith. They say, no, these guys are too big, these guys are too strong, and God goes, all right, well, I guess you're wandering in the desert for 40 years. And then we rush through the Judges, Joshua, Judges, we rush through the Kings, or the first couple of Kings. We went through David, Saul, and Solomon, and we really learned about Solomon being the wisest man, and even though he was super wise and the wisest person on earth, he still rejected God and went after the foreign gods, and God said, all right, well, I'm breaking up the kingdom. I have to take away part of the kingdom from you. I promised your father, this descendant would be a kingdom of Israel in the order of Melchizedek. So I can't take it all away from you, but I'm going to take most of it away from you. And so that's where we're at right now, is the kingdom has been broken up.
That was impressive. I'm so glad you did that.
That was well done. Recap right there.
I wouldn't have
Snaps
done that
mark.
good. That was impressive.
So I'm going to read the story. The next section of the story, and you guys are going to listen hard and then recap this story to me, which will help you kind of go over the details and get really learn them and come up with the hard questions. The story continues. Eventually, both the kingdoms of Israel and Judah were led by kings who worshipped idols and false gods. The people followed their example. Because of their rebellion, Israel and Judah had removed themselves from God's protection. For over 300 years, the Lord sent prophets like Elijah and Elisha, Amos and Hosea, with messages to warn Israel that their rebellion would put them outside his protection. Through these prophets, he warned that they would be overtaken and become slaves in a foreign land if they didn't return to the covenant their nation had made with God. And one of the final oracles that the Lord sends to Israel through Hosea, he says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him. I called my son out of Egypt. But the more I called him, the farther he moved from me, offering sacrifices to the images of Baal and burning incense to idols. I myself taught Israel how to walk, leading him along by the hand. But he doesn't know or even care that it was I who took care of him. I led Israel along with my ropes of kindness and love. I lifted the yoke from his neck, and I myself stooped to feed him. But since my people refuse to return to me, they will return to Egypt and will be forced to serve Assyria. My heart is torn within me." Assyrians came and conquered Israel, dragging the children off to serve the gods they were already worshiping. They pillaged the land and made exiles of the Hebrews. Judah, the southern kingdom, also rebelled against their covenant with God, but when Judah saw what the Assyrians did to Israel, they cried out to God for mercy, and God spared them. A few years later, though, Judah was back at it again, worshiping false gods. God sent more prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, warning them. 100 years after Assyria conquered Israel and took them into slavery, Judah's kings were deeply and grossly involved in worshiping idols, even sacrificing their children to them. Since they were determined not to live in covenant with the Lord, the prophet Jeremiah declared that they would be exiled to Babylon. Their children were enslaved by the Babylonian Empire and gave new Babylonian names and identities. It wasn't long before Jerusalem was completely destroyed by the Babylonians as they carried off many Hebrews to Babylon. But even then, God kept sending Israel messages through Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel. Jeremiah gave them hope, saying, a day is coming when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel. I will put my laws in their minds and write my commands on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." Isaiah and Micah told the people about a coming king who would save them and rule forever, a Messiah. The Messiah was one who was filled with God's Spirit. He was God's choice for king. From this point on, they looked for the Messiah, which was to be God's chosen deliverer and king for them. God gave the prophets visions of what this Messiah would be like. He stirred up the heart of the people with hope of a miraculous rescue and visions of a new holy city. The prophet Ezra began to collect these writings together and point people to what God was saying, like things like, he will be a descendant of King David. A virgin will give birth to him in Bethlehem. A messenger from the wilderness will prepare people for his coming. He will bring good news and healing to the poor, brokenhearted, and the sick. He will do no wrong, living a life without sin. He will be beaten, whipped, and wounded, all so we can have peace, healing, and forgiveness. He will be silent when he is accused. He will be put on trial and thrown in prison. His hands and feet will be pierced. He will be killed like a criminal and buried in a rich man's tomb. He will lay the punishment and guilt for all the sins of the world on him. His life will be made an offering for us. Because of him, many will be made right with God. After 70 years of being captives in foreign lands, the foreign king led many of these exiles back home on a long journey. They hoped to rebuild their lives and rebuild the temple and city. God was with them as they painstakingly picked up the pieces and patched the rubble. Then things got really quiet. For the next 400 years, there seemed to be no word, interaction, or intervention from God.
Please don't ask us. Can we just go to the question? Oh, gosh.
Okay, so we're taking off from Solomon.
Yep.
Okay, so that's kind of where it started. Solomon was worshiping false gods. The kingdom was torn in two. Though God had promised David, one of your ancestors will remain on the throne in the order of Melchizedek, he took most of the kingdom away because of Solomon's disobedience. And that is
That's where we start.
Okay. I just had to make sure I had all those
the neighboring
pieces.
nations that came in, the Assyrians. Am I jumping too far?
Well, why did they come in?
That was God's judgment hand.
Because they just refused to remain in covenant with God. It was wording something like that. They refused to remain in covenant or committed.
Yep.
They refused to trust the way that God wants them to.
And then they were with the Assyrians
him.
for 100 years.
Wait, wow, you did a big jump there.
Did I go too far? This is why I don't do the recap.
This is hard.
So there's two kingdoms, Israel
Yeah,
and Judah.
Israel and Judah.
Israel refuses to repent, but
Yes.
Judah is in some way repentant. So
Yes.
Israel's
yeah.
conquered first by
Yes.
Assyria.
Yes.
Got it.
So Judah's in faithfulness to God, while Israel is kind of falling out of God's favor, and kind of stays there.
But that only lasts like 100 years.
Yeah.
100 years?
It's 100 years between the two exiles.
Yes. So for 100 years, Judah hangs on, obeying,
Yep.
until they also are now worshiping other gods and sacrificing their children to those gods.
Right,
So
even
they
worse.
went even
Right.
further.
Yeah. So it's not just that they backslid to the point of Israel. They went further. They did it worse. Yeah.
So
Yep.
then they're conquered by Babylon.
Yep.
Babylon takes them into their culture and gives them Babylonian names and identities and makes them become Babylonian, basically.
Yep.
So now God's people are scattered all over the place. Take it away, Morgan.
Okay, so picking up from there, I'm trying to think of the next. So God starts speaking to individual people. Is that where it kind of picked up? I mean, I'm trying to remember where the flow went, but there was.
I think it's 70 years. I think right in there is where you said 70 years.
That's at the very end.
Oh, okay, darn it. We're
But yeah,
stuck.
while they
Let's talk
are,
about Ezra. Let's talk about Ezra. Then.
Micah. Oh yeah, there's supposed to be prophesies of a future Messiah.
Right, what is God doing while the people are in exile?
Call. Good call.
What is God telling
Giving them
them?
hope of a future.
Yeah.
This isn't the end.
painting-
There's
painting
still
the
a way
picture
back
for 'em.
for you.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And lots of prophets' names.
A lot of prophets and that really emotional poem from Hosea, just that you had read off, of Israel being like the sun. That's just God saying, "Come closer to me," and yet the sun keeps moving farther from God.
Yeah, good job.
It's that's the constant like falling away, and then
Yep, that's stuck.
endless cycle. It seemed like.
Yep.
Yeah. And so during the 70 years, there's this person that's been prophesied, right? Who is this prophecy about?
The Messiah,
Yep.
Messiah.
promised Messiah.
Which would be the weirdest thing to start hearing all these prophecies about this person. I just think that would be because like we hear about weird weird things that people throw out there all the time, and then I mean, what would make this one so different? That's what I started thinking. It's like,
Well, if you think about the cycle and granted this is a new generation of people, but in their history, this is part of the cycle. Is they sin, they worship other gods, they fall away from the one true God, they beg God for help, he sends someone to help them and bring them back to right relationship with him.
Yeah.
And that lasts for a little while before it starts over again.
oh,
So this is their pattern, is that they're now crying out for help.
yeah.
But this time, it's going to be a different answer. The Messiah is a different answer than God's given before.
Right.
Right, and the messages of hope came through multiple people. It wasn't just one voice. It was
And warnings came through multiple people,
Yeah.
too.
Ezekiel.
Insert dies 70 years. I think it's right around here now. So
Are we to the 70
And
years
after
mark?
70 years,
Well, for Ezra is doing what? What is Ezra doing?
Yeah.
he's
You remember?
compiling
he is.
the stories,
All the writings together?
yes,
Yep.
writings.
And
He's
so
a scribe.
Ezra doesn't write them, but he compiles them, and it basically lists like a laundry list of things that the Messiah will be like. Do you remember any of those?
He will be silent before his accusers. He'll be born of a virgin.
Line of the King of
He'll
David.
rescue the people. He will. That's all I got. I mean, besides the things I know, but That's all I recall from what you read.
I can't believe that you remembered that many things of what he just read. I literally remember 70 years at this
We've
point.
practiced a few times now
impressive.
listening.
Is this episode 12 now? 11, 12?
Okay.
Yeah. And then, am I jumping too far?
70 years being in
Seven-
captive.
Hey!
70 years.
Now they're going to try and put their lives back together.
The
They
king.
slowly start being released.
Going back to their nations.
Going
And
back
then,
home.
am I jumping too far to the 400 years of silence?
Nope, that's next.
Yeah, we hit 400 years of silence, which that's what I wonder what happens in these 400 years. Like where's God, but what were the conditions at this point? Where's Israel now and Judah? Yeah.
History tells us that Rome has taken over.
Rome has taken over, and they're now bringing in Roman infrastructure and roads and systems and laws and
And the people are crying out for a deliverer.
But there's been several nations that have conquered them since then, right?
Yes.
yeah.
Greece has come through here.
Yeah.
Rome's come through, right?
Yep. Many more pagan gods have been introduced to their lives.
Right, yeah. So lots of opportunity. All right. What do we learn about God in this?
So, yes, we talked about consequences from your decisions last episode. But in the midst of all these consequences, God is still trying to reach and speak to his people. And he's speaking through these messengers to these people who are in captivity, but he's not not just rebuking them, but he's giving them promises. He's still telling them like how he's going to save them after all this time.
Yep.
And here we are again, that patient
Yeah,
aspect.
and he hasn't
is-
given up.
Yep.
Why has he not given up yet? Also, we have promise keeper up there, but I kind of think it's a bigger word than promise keeper. So I think the word covenant is in there somewhere, and we've talked about covenant already, but it's bigger than a promise. This is a covenant that he is determined to keep his end of the covenant.
A promise
Even-
feels like me and you are making a
Yeah,
pact.
pinky swear.
This is like generations and generations
Yeah.
of I mean, it's just crazy to think
Even
about.
though it appears humans are doing their hardest work ever to
sure.
break it,
To screw it up.
he still will not break his end of the covenant. That's really powerful. So, Morgan, you're the writer because you're closest to the board, so you get to write somewhere up there.
Covenant
Covenant keeper?
keeper.
You can do promise. It's next to promise keeper, maybe. I don't know.
Covenant keeper.
Also, I don't know if we've used the word father yet, but Tony, you bringing up the Hosea
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah.
I don't think
God-
we've defined God as a father yet.
God viewing Israel as his precious son who's
Yeah.
abandoning him and disobeying and
We've
abusing
definitely used the metaphor
relationship.
multiple times.
Yeah.
Would that mean that I don't know if we have this up there because now it's getting kind of messy, but he also seems to be very, I don't know if this word has too much negative connotation to it, but he's very jealous for the 100% love and commitment of his people. Not just, there's a God, but he's one of the gods. He seems to be very demanding in a positive way of their 100% commitment to him.
Of the whole nation,
Yes.
not just some of the
They
nation.
seem
Right.
flat out incapable of giving him.
Yeah.
Do we have encourager on there or encouraging?
The word that I was thinking was hope, like hope giver, or,
Yeah.
I think like when we read through that story, just to go through that much disobedience, it's like over and over and over, and still for there to be the message of hope, that there's like this underlying hope that's being given, for years and years and years beyond where they are currently in the middle of their destruction. But there's like just this hope giver kind of message in all that story. And I don't know if it's
Yeah,
up there because I
somehow
can't even
find a
tell
way
what
to
is on
write
here
it
and what
as
is
a
not.
descriptive word.
We're running out of space. God has so many things.
Okay.
So we talked about Melchizedek at the very end of our last session. How does that prophecy of Melchizedek come in line with this prophecy of a Messiah?
Yeah, we finished the last episode trying to define the significance of a priest and a king functioning together as one role rather than two separate roles, which kind of blew our minds, and we needed to really let that sink in. But now we see that God is promising that this rescuer, Messiah, will inhabit both those
be
roles
both.
in his one
What
person.
Moses had rejected, he will now embrace and say, I'll be both. Yeah.
He's filling in the details, I think, right? It's like, there's going to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Why didn't God completely destroy the Israelites when they rejected him? Why not just start over
Which
with somebody
time?
else?
Yeah, I mean,
Any
go
of the
back.
times, really.
I think we just keep going back to covenant, to promise.
No, and Morgan just said it. There's always a way forward, that's the hope. Is even though humans seem determined to mess it up repeatedly, that God still is determined to keep covenant.
And I think that continues to clue us into his nature. It's that determination to love humanity and forgive humanity and reach humanity. Because, like, as humans, we're like, yeah, he should have pulled the plug. He should have just wiped us all out. But he continues, obviously, to still give hope.
I know we already talked about how God came to a point of enough when he wiped out most of the population in a flood. And then he said, I'm never going to do that again. But I just can't help but wonder, weren't things about as bad? And so maybe you didn't pick a flood. Maybe this time it's an earthquake or a fire or... But at what point did he determine, nope, I'm in it with these people? Was that Abraham? Was that when the covenant was made? I'm asking you, Mark. Please answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple covenants, right? One with Abraham saying, hey, I'm going to be with you forever. And so somebody in Abraham's line has to live. He made the covenant again with Isaac, and he made it with Jacob. And he made it with all of Israel at the mountain. And so it was
True.
no longer a descendant. Now it was all of Israel had to be saved.
I think that's a really important point. Because things could have been just as grim. I mean, in Noah's day, the people were described as every single person and every thought was evil. They could be just as bad right now, but yeah, the difference is that God has determined, I will work with these people. But we still have free will, which makes it super complicated because we're determined to mess it up.
But that's really encouraging, especially for today's time, that God's still so hopeful, so pursuing humanity and people, even in today, with all that's going on today. That encourages me, just that this recurring cycle, I think we, like Di said last episode, we look at the recurring cycle of sin, but what about the recurring cycle of forgiveness that God keeps showing us? Yeah.
I think it also speaks to God's, just understanding of what he created. Like that it's not, like that even if he was to bring another flood, it wouldn't necessarily change the way that we're broken. Mm-hmm. And so, you bring up a really good point, Di. Like, why wouldn't he just bring another flood? It's just as bad as it was then. Why wouldn't you just bring another flood? But I wonder almost like if it just shows this understanding, I'm at peace with the fact that I'm going to be in this battle. I'm going to have to walk through this. And there's some of that determination in that, but just this understanding that I know who I created, and I understand that I'm in this as well for the long haul. I don't know, but that is really weird to think that we should probably be in another flood right now.
Except that he made a covenant that he
Right,
wouldn't.
exactly. Except for that just point that he made.
Yeah, this Messiah is totally different than a flood. Totally different, like an opposite response, right?
That is a great point, actually. Yeah. Yes. This God, instead of coming down with a fist, is going to come down with the future hope, the way out.
The savior of all mankind, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting because the way for him to solve the problem before was taking out everything, and now I'm not taking out anything. I'm actually adding. I'm bringing something to you instead of like trying to take you out. It's totally different play. If you wanted to say it in those terms, it was really interesting.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this Messiah.
I can't wait.
I can't wait.
I wonder what will happen.
How does he change the world? How does he save it? Okay, last question. God is speaking and proclaiming things through these new characters called prophets. What is sticking out to you about these prophets and what they are saying?
From what we just heard.
Yeah.
They give warnings. They obey it appears that they obey what God tells them to say, even if it's not popular.
They encourage. They're essentially God's mouthpiece to people. Yeah.
And they give hope. I can't remember if all of them gave hope, but at least a few stand out in my mind.
Yeah. There's a lot of definite direction and like appeals to change.
That reconciliation, right? God is saying, hey, reconcile to me, reconcile to me. Okay, one more that I just found, or that I just listened. Like, what's up with this 400 years of silence? Like, why would God just like stop interacting with Israel? I mean, they just came back. They were just come back to the promised land, right? And then God goes, all right, I'm going to leave you alone for a while. He's been very interactive, right? Not all through, but since being rescued from Egypt, very interactive. As soon as they
Well,
cry
first of
out-
all, do we actually know that he was
Was he silent, or was there no one recording?
Or no one recorded it?
Yeah.
well, I guess there are some recordings that are considered canon in some aspects, but aren't considered canon in others. But
Canon meaning part of
part
our
of-
Bible that we have.
or even part of the Hebrew Bible, but they're part of the Septuagint, I guess. The Greek
Wow,
Bible.
you're going way
We're
out
going
there
deep now.
into scholar land. You
What's
just
the
lost all of our
Septuagint?
viewers.
It's a bird, actually.
Oh, okay.
Different translation. All right.
That's an interesting
But
question.
according to the mainline Jews, right, the rabbis, right, they don't have any full-on canonized writings. They have a lot of writings about, or they have writings of like, what was it? The Feast of Lights, right? The light stuff came in. That was a miracle that happened. I think they think Daniel was written during this period. So
Did you read in there, or am I pulling from some knowledge of the Bible, that the people would have a famine of hearing the word of the Lord?
I think that's your knowledge.
Okay.
It's
Well,
really good, though. I like it.
somehow in my head is that phrase, which makes me wonder, is it to create a hunger to hear from God?
I almost like it, like when you just hear the leading up to the story, you almost just like, it's like a coddling parent, almost, it's like, I can tell you something. My daughter's a year and a half old, so I don't really know this, but like I can tell you something so many times, and I can give you the opportunity to do it so many times, but there's got to come a moment where like you just like kind of like realize that you have this season where you try to do it on your own, and you realize that maybe
And the parent says, okay,
yeah. And
Go
then later,
figure
I
it
told
out.
you so,
go run away or
Yeah.
go do
to
it.
college.
You're so smart.
If you
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
you know how to do this, and we've been playing this game,
I'll
for
be
hundreds
here
and hundreds and
when
hundreds
you
of
decide
years,
you need me.
well, then go ahead and try
Yeah.
it. That's kind of what I was thinking when I just kind of thinking through all that. It does make you think of that, though.
it is interesting that from the exile onwards, Israel is never recorded as having followed other gods. Like, they might follow badly the right God, but they never, they either go for the straight money culture of the tax collectors and stuff, but we never see them, we never hear about Baal again or Moloch or any of these guys again, right? All that,
Never thought of that.
like,
Oh, and that's really weird considering all the other gods that would be introduced in that 400 years. The fact that there wouldn't be.
well, the Assyrians were polytheistic, Babylonians were polytheistic,
Maybe that exile
Greeks.
just
Romans, everybody was
If
polytheistic.
we go back to that famine idea, I don't know if anyone out there has ever been on a diet or tried fasting, but you're like, oh, piece of cake, I can do that. And then like 3 minutes into a diet, you're like, all I want is a donut, and I don't even like donuts. Yeah. Like maybe there is an element of you've just had this for so long, and now if I take it away, are you going to determine whether or not you actually want it, which is the word of God or the voice of God or the leading or the direction or the intervention or the relationship with God. You didn't want it, so I'm going to let you just see what life is like without it. And then suddenly they realize, okay, we don't want this. But that was a long time. That's a long lesson. And interesting because we've already studied how long they were in slavery in Egypt, that those two things kind of bookend. Like we joked about creation 3.0, like coming out of Egypt was starting over. That was after 400 years of slavery and calling on God to rescue them. And now we're at the bookend piece of it where it's like, okay, let's go ahead and learn this again.
Yeah.
Maybe in the 400 years, I don't know, maybe God's priming the pump. Maybe he's working on something behind the scenes that the next time they hear God or see from God, it's going to be something different, or I don't know.
Well, it almost makes you think too of, Moses not being able to get to the place, and the generation having to kind of like fade away for them to step into the next generation to step into the new thing. And 400 years, that's a long time. That's not just like one generation of people. That's a lot of generations of people. And so you're talking about like a whole different way of living. I mean, think of how much generations change in just 2 generations, but let alone 400 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole different way of living. That's a whole different way of thinking. And it makes you think of how much, not just person's faith would change, but the way that the world changes, and just how all that would affect.
I keep thinking
way
of the
you
word
view God.
preparation too. There's such a preparation. Like when a woman becomes pregnant, it's a good thing it takes so many months because it takes a long time to be prepared to actually parent a child. Maybe that's a bad example, but I just keep thinking of there's something about the preparation of, okay, I'm ready for God to show up now. I'm ready for his intervention. I'm ready. But it took me a while to get there. And corporately, I mean, it took a while for God's people maybe to get there to be ready for him to show up.
Not just his people, but also the world.
Yeah, the political
the
scene.
culture,
Yeah,
the
for
political
sure.
scene, right?
The religious
right.
scene.
Maybe the word is like sensitivity. Like when you become so overwhelmed with something, it's hard to appreciate it like in the moment. 400 years, you would just, like almost like we are today, like just waiting, waiting for something. And I wonder if there was just like this anticipation that was building in that 400 years. There's when the Messiah did come, it was like, I'm sensitive to who this person might be now. I'm not just going to look by him, maybe the way that other generations would have, but there's this yearning and this wanting and this sensitivity building to be open to that person coming.
Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. That's all the time we have. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it. Comments, of course, are appreciated as well. Let us know what you think. Read the scriptures. The prophets are really good. There's a lot of dense stuff in there, but there's a lot of nuggets of gold as well. Like really think about and try to discover what the audience is, who is God trying to talk to, what is the message that's trying to come across, how is God trying to really reach out to his beloved Israel. Ask the hard questions. We appreciate it. All right, thanks.